Download Whiskey Hell Podcast. We call attention to the mainstream media narratives weekly in hopes that you'll have fun with how ridiculous the news really is. We don't want to change your mind. We just want to give you perspective so that you can choose more wisely and be more aware. Couple that with great craft beer, hilarious stories, deep thoughts, and real conversations. We know you're going to enjoy it. Download Whiskey Hell Podcast anywhere you find outstanding shows.
Take my eyes open to force reality. Why can't you just let me eat my weight in glee? Hush.
Well, hello, World Ablaze listeners, and welcome to episode 23. First things first, want to update everybody on our success thus far. We started Fonts Media about a month ago, where my brother and I got together and we integrated multiple shows under one network. And today we are, as of the count of this morning, listened to in 11 countries, and our downloads as a network and even for every show individually has skyrocketed. And we really appreciate your support and the fact that you continue to listen. So with that being said, I'm going to open a cold beverage here real quick. And let me see if I can get this to pop. There we go. And I'm going to raise a can to you. Thank you very much. And we really, really do appreciate your support. Again, cheers to everyone. Another thing I want to do is, I know the Trump thing we've already responded to. I've responded to. My brother and I have responded to on both of our shows individually, which would be Stretch Goose Podcast and, of course, World Ablaze with George Fonts. And, of course, on the show we both host, which is Random Thoughts with Manuel and George. And I'm sure everyone's already heard that. Everybody's had their take and their spin and their opinion. But I realized what I really want to do is I want to stay focused and on track here. I'm going to bring this show back to what I originally intended it to be, which was to present information and facts that, for the most part, either flew under the radar because big media wouldn't cover it, or because it was suppressed by what may have been considered to be a bigger story. But in this case, I'm sure many people haven't heard about Senate Bill 14, or California Senate Bill 14, which is now SB 1414, which addresses issues as it relates to, well, sex trafficking and minors being used for sex. And more importantly to me, because this is where I live in California, that of all places, you wouldn't think that we would have issues to the level we do with sex trafficking. And when I say California, you would probably automatically assume, well, sex trafficking issue, sure, you're close to the border of Mexico, there's a lot of cartel stuff, things like that. But surprisingly, this issue of sex trafficking, the major issue and hub of it all, is really in the state capital city of Sacramento, far away from the border, where law enforcement seems to have their hands tied in trying to alleviate the problem, because there are too many stumbling blocks put in front of them that do not allow them to really do their job. One of which is, and this is the ugly truth of sex trafficking, but the majority of girls that are taken and put into this ugly business are minors that are under the age of 17, under the age of 16. A lot of them are 12 years old, 14 years old. And because they are minors, they can't really be held. You're not allowed to really question them, because as minors, they have no idea what they're doing or what they're getting involved with. And that's the logic there. And to me, that's very stupid, because this this stops law enforcement from questioning these young girls and getting information, very important information that is needed to be able to go after the sex traffickers themselves or the pimps. The issue that we have has been going on for quite some time. And there's a documentary. Now, I've said this before. Big media, big news outlets, when you see the flagship shows on CNN and Fox, MSNBC, you're not getting real news. You're getting opinion pieces. In fact, it's not much more than entertainment at this point. There's no deep dive. There's no real investigative journalism. And I've always said that if you want to see the actual news, you have to watch the local channels. The local news networks seem to be the only place where you're going to actually find any real news. So local news network KCRA3, I believe out of Sacramento itself, conducted their own investigation and put a documentary together, which really brought this issue to light. And hats off to them, because nobody else was really focusing on this. You didn't hear about this anywhere. And the only people that were really aware of and cared about this were obviously the law enforcement there in Sacramento, the local politicians, and California State Senator Shannon Grove, who is the champion of trying to change the laws in place, which would enforce harsher penalties for engaging in sex trafficking with minors. Because to my shock and to anyone's shock, it has not been a felony. If a minor was being used for the business of sex in California at this moment, the penalty that would have been imposed would have been literally maybe max 2 years in jail and a fine. And then that pimp would be back out on the streets doing it again and doing it again, with only a 2-year punishment at the maximum level at the moment. And also the fact that if caught, it would only be classified as a misdemeanor, not a felony. This does nothing but support the horrendous act of sex trafficking and abusing young children. The fact that in California that this was never really a harsh crime, or there wasn't a harsher penalty to be imposed on this horrendous crime, just baffles me. And I don't understand how this has been able to fly under the radar for so long until Shannon Grove started really speaking up about this and trying to change this. She's been at it for at least on record a year. I know she's been at it longer than that, but back to the documentary by KCRA3. It's called Escaping the Blade, and I encourage everybody to watch it. Now, it is a made-for-TV documentary, so I think they could have presented even more evidence and gone a little deeper, but I get why not, being, made for the general public on cable television or syndicated TV. There's certain things that you can show and can't show, and there's certain things you can say and not say. But regardless of that, they did a commendable job of going out of their way to really, really bring this ugly truth to light. And in the documentary, and of course, as you know, I like presenting facts and leaving the links to those facts in the show notes. So you know that I'm not just talking out my ass here. Okay, I'm not just making any of this up. But I will have the link to this video. You can actually find it on YouTube, so I will have it there for you to watch, and I encourage you to watch this. But they talk about, victims have talked about how literally these sex traffickers or pimps are literally just cruising the streets where they know young children are, and I'm not making this up, young children are walking to elementary school, walking. And these cars would slow down and try to offer these girls rides, of which they'll never come back from. They prey on young teenage angst, and they take these girls and these teenagers in under the false pretense of love, and then turn them into whores because they try to give off this false sense of love and that, hey, if you love me, you'll do anything I say and do anything for me. And try to say, well, this is only temporary. I only need you to do this for now because of whatever excuse they make up, which in and of itself is crazy that anyone would agree to even have sex with somebody else because someone asked you to do it. There was even a story of where a woman talked about that when she was a young girl, her mother of all people sold her into the sex trade and talked about the first time where she put a blindfold over her, told her to lay down and not worry about anything. And as she took her blindfold off, she can see her mother watching her get raped. All of this in Sacramento. And this has been going on for a while. The sheriffs are frustrated. They're going around rounding up prostitutes, but that's not fixing the issue. The only thing it can do is hope to bring them in so they can get information that will lead them to their pimps. But the problem is they're so scared to say anything. And of course, in the case of a minor, the officer can't even really question because they're a minor. So there's just this big roundabout circle of ugliness that just never gets resolved. Never. It's just crazy to think that this is going on in California, in Sacramento. So Shannon Grove, she championed this SB 14. And what SB 14 does is it tried to make things much harsher and make it to where the punishment more closely fits the crime. In my opinion, the punishment that they're imposing still doesn't fit the crime. Not to me. These people should, I'm sorry, you're going to disagree with me, but they should be hung. If you're preying on young children and trying to make money on them to have sex with adults and perverted men, which they themselves should also be executed, in my opinion. And I know this isn't going to be a popular opinion, but you know, that's the way I think. And you have a right to disagree. But this SB 14, actually, I'm just going to read from the senateca.gov here. Senator Shannon Grove has introduced Senate Bill 14, a bill that would include sex trafficking of a minor in the list of crimes that are defined as serious under California law. Now, before I go further, as I said before, I can't imagine why this already wouldn't have been considered a serious offense under California law. It's mind-boggling that this was never a serious offense. Well, anyway, moving on. So what she wanted to do is make the crime a strike under the three strikes law. If passed, SB 14 will help strengthen protections of thousands of victims of sex trafficking. And this bill has now been moved up and has been now labeled SB 1414. So CA Senate Bill for SB 1414. Now here's a clip of Shannon Grove explaining why we need to implement SB 1414.
We've all focused our attention on as much as we should have on the traffickers themselves and the brutality of selling a child. And unfortunately, we haven't focused enough on the buying side of the equation. We know how that supply and demand works. In order to sell a child for sex, there must be someone willing to purchase that child for sex. That's why we're here today, to address the purchasers and put a stop to those who would pay to have sex with children. Currently in California, any person who solicits, agrees to engage in, or engages in any act of commercial sex with a minor is charged only with a misdemeanor. Now, there are certain exceptions in the law which allow an offender to be charged with a felony for having sex with a minor. The challenge is often that requires special circumstances. For example, many of the statutes will only charge a purchaser with a more severe punishment if the child is under 14 years old. Additional requirements include force, sodomy, assault, and lack of consent. As a result, juvenile sex offender victims between the ages of 14 and 17, who are often being exploited in order to allow a buyer to avoid harsher penalties. Let me be clear, a minor can never consent to sex trafficking. The opposition has stated there are many runaways and young adults ages 15, 16, and 17 that use child prostitution per se as a voluntary means of survival. Our coalition of survivors that are here today would say that's not true.
Now, much to my surprise, to Senator Shannon Grove's surprise, and many others, for some reason, now, as of now, this bill's gone through the 3 readings. It's already gone through 3 readings. And the thing I don't get is why there were multiple amendments that need to be made. So I'm going to read this update on SB 1414. So prior to the floor vote, the Senate Public Safety Committee forced amendments into the bill that weakened protections for children ages 16 and 17. So they tried to put any children that were in the age of 16 and 17, classify them not as minors, basically. Which is fucking ridiculous. It really is. Because even at 18, you're still kind of a child. You're not developed. Your mind, you don't know what's going on, where you are. I would even argue most people in the 20s aren't even really adults yet. But anyway, moving on. The Senate Appropriations Committee had the opportunity to strengthen the bill language, but failed to do so. SB 1414 is a bipartisan measure, joint authored by Senator Ana Caballero, Democrat from Merced, and Senator Susan Rubio, Democrat from Baldwin Park, California, and co-sponsored by Love Never Fails and Three Strands Global Foundation. So the crime, and this is quoted by Senator Shannon Grove, the crime of purchasing a child of any age for sex in the state of California should be a prison felony, which I absolutely agree with. She goes on to say, I am incredibly disappointed in the Senate pro tem and Senate leadership for once again passing on an opportunity to restore amendments to the bill and stand up for all of California's children. This outcome is a failure on the part of legislative leadership who caved to political pressure and did not prioritize the safety of our children. We must restore this bill in the Assembly to protect every child in the state of California from the horrific crime of sex trafficking. Now, here are the forced committee amendments that, by the way, were made by California Senator Democrats. And I can't understand why they would want these changes made, regardless of party. As a human being, why you wouldn't want these harsh penalties. But here's the forced committee amendments. Soliciting or buying children 15 and under for sex can only be charged as a wobbler, either a misdemeanor punishable by a minimum of 2 days in jail, or a fine, or both, or a felony. Buying 16 and 17-year-old children only punishable as a misdemeanor. So if they're 16 or 17, it's only a misdemeanor. If they're younger than that, then it's a wobbler. It's like, well, it can go either way. And I'm going to further clarify that as I read more into this, that the only way this becomes a felony is if it becomes a second or third offense. So it's really attached to the 3 strikes rule at this point. But even then, I mean, you're buying and selling a 15-year-old for sex, and you may only get 2 days in jail. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Okay, the other committee amendment, felony charge only carries possible jail time, not prison eligible. So they don't even go to prison, they go to jail. Jail is not prison, and jail is for shorter terms, which means there's no intent on sending anybody to prison for any amount of time, probably longer than 4 or 5 years. Here's another committee amendment they wanted to make. Only perpetrators with a previous conviction of purchasing sex from a child 15 or under on the second offense and with over 10-year age gap to the victim must register as a tier 1 sex offender. Okay, so they're trying to say that if it's your first time having sex with a child that is 15, that you don't have to register as a sex offender? Only if there's a 10-year age gap. That's it. So if a 20-year-old is having sex with a 15-year-old, they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to register as a sex offender. That doesn't make any sense at all. And why the committee would propose these amendments is crazy. Well, Senator Grove's proposed amendments would have made it a prison felony for solicitation of purchasing sex from a child of any age and remove the 10-year age gap requirement for sex offender registry, which I totally agree with, and something that really should be upheld. Senator Grove will continue fighting on behalf of every child who is being brought and sold into the state of California. And so there you have it. So people are disgusted by this. The fact that this was never a serious offense and that you can get away with having sex with a 15-year-old or younger. I mean, let's just be honest. They put the limit at 15, but we're talking 12-year-old girls, 13-year-old girls, 14-year-old girls. And they don't have to register as a sex offender, and it's basically just a misdemeanor. You could just only face 2 years in jail. And it's not even just having sex with them. It's selling a child of that age, where it's the pimp who is literally selling that child's services, that putting them into the sex trade at that age. They get a slap on the wrist, a misdemeanor, 2 days in jail minimum. If you're not disgusted, look, 2024 has really, really turned out to be a hell of a year in which our government is completely being exposed. And there's always these reports of this secret pedophilia ring, that there's this crazy cabal at the top of everything just looking down and pulling the strings, and that most of our government officials are literally a part of this, and that a big part of their income and influence and power is all based around child sex trafficking. And it sounds like a conspiracy. You don't want to believe it. You're like, there's no way an adult would do that. There's no way an elected official would do that. But when you take in what I just read, that it was never a felony. It was never considered a felony. That even now they want to make amendments to where it's just a slap on the wrist. It makes you wonder if those conspiracies are not conspiracies. There's so much more coming out about child sex trafficking and pedophilia when it comes to movie stars, Hollywood in general, and government officials. And nobody wants to believe it, but little by little, there is more and more evidence that is pointing towards this not necessarily being a conspiracy anymore. Now, let me rein this back to SB 1414. So, obviously, Shannon Grove is very disgusted by this. And there's also going to be, actually, let's read who were the people that actually wanted to impose these amendments. So I got this off of KCRA.com, who is the local station or local news outlet that put this whole thing together. The whole documentary that I was telling you about. It says here that SB 1414 would classify the crime as a felony, which I already said, carrying a maximum penalty of up to 4 years in prison and $25,000 fine. Now, of course, that is only given the conditions of the 10-year age gap, or if it's less than a 10-year age gap, and if it's a second or third offense. So remember that very important little, point there, that will turn it into a felony. It's not automatically a felony, which is crazy. Okay. So currently purchasing or soliciting a child for sex is a misdemeanor with a maximum penalty of up to a year in jail or a minimum of 2 days in jail, along with a $10,000 fine. It says here that Democrats on the dais, against Grove's will, held a vote on the changes before voting to move the amendment proposal forward. The vote was moved by State Senator Nancy Skinner from Berkeley, who's also a Democrat, Senator Scott Wiener, and committee chairwoman Aisha, sorry, I don't remember how to pronounce her name, Wahab, voted, or Wahab, it's Wahab, who voted to move forward with the amendments as Grove watched in disbelief. Her voice was shaking. Grove said she is on the record declining these amendments. To force the amendments to me in front of survivors to water this down to avoid 16 and 17-year-olds, Grove said. And I have to agree with her. So how can they sit here and justify continuing to support child sex trafficking, which is really what they're doing by these amendments? To me, it's basically still supporting this, not really taking it serious or even caring to take it serious. These are elected officials that are going out of their way to support child sex trafficking. In California, it has been in a decline for quite some time. And it's something that I have talked about many times. My brother has talked about many times. Gavin Newsom has always been on our radar and a part of the conversation on most of our shows. But the fact that California legislature wants to make sure that, hey, if you're 16 or 17 caught up in this, the pimp doesn't have to face a felony charge. If you're 15 or under, it's still a misdemeanor unless there's a less than 10-year age gap and unless you've done this multiple times, which is fucking ridiculous. And she's not the only one to discuss it. I have a video here too of Democratic State Senator Susan Ingman, who voiced her opinion and disbelief in regard to this proposed bill. I want to go ahead and play her response here.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I'd like to say, as a progressive, proud member of this body for the last 12 years, I'm done. I'm done with us protecting people who would buy and abuse our children. I'm done. I don't want to send more black and brown men to prison. I don't want more people in prison, but I don't want people buying girls. I don't want people buying little girls anymore. And I'm tired of saying it's okay and that we have to protect the men who do it. As a mental health professional and as a social worker, I can tell you I've spent my entire career working with people who have been wounded. I'm not going to say beyond repair, but they have been wounded to their core by the abuse that's been heaped on them, oftentimes by those that they love and look to protect them. And if their parents won't do it, then by God, we should. Again, I am not arguing that we open the gates to flood our prisons with people, but I am arguing that we have a moral responsibility to say enough. Enough. We have given away enough on this area, and we've got to move back into the center, or we all look like fools and laughing stocks. And what do we stand for? I ask all of you to watch the documentary that Senator Grove was in, Senator from Kern County was just in, that talked about this very place in Sacramento where girls are being bought and sold. Men are being given a little slap in the hand or a couple days, and then they're back out again, and they do the same thing. They get caught over and over and over again, and somehow that's okay. It's not okay. It is not okay anymore, and no more am I watching. Like I said, I'm leaving, but the rest of you who are going to be here for a while, let's get our stuff together and really start focusing on some of the important things. We talk about learning, and we talk about being safe. This is like at the core of it. And a lot of these kids can be throwaway kids. They're poor kids. They're kids of color. But they shouldn't have to live a life determined by what happens to them by others at a very young age and by have the Democratic Party of California say it's okay. It's not okay. And I'm not doing it anymore, and I hope none of you do too. We have to be able to draw a line, and for me, I'm drawing a line. I urge your I vote.
All right, so there's that video. So she's calling out her own Democratic Party. And the crazy thing about this is, in the news, anything that we've seen that had to do with any kind of, quite literally, pedophilia or any close calls that would make any kind of charges, or bring any kind of charges or accusations about being a pedophile, have all, from what I can recall, primarily involved Democrats. not all Democrats. I'm not going to classify everybody who's a Democrat as a pedophile because they're not. But it's crazy that there seems to be a constant theme here. And how can this not raise any red flags when the California State Senate, Democratic California State Senate, are the ones who wanted to make these amendments to remove the harsh penalties that Senator Shannon Grove was trying to impose? And obviously, there are people who are human beings that, regardless of party, want to stand up for this change and can't even fathom why this was never, ever, ever anything that was considered a harsh crime. A crime that should have been punishable as a felony, that would have allowed law enforcement to really go after the people who are trafficking these young girls. It's as if they don't care about our children and they don't care about the consequences. And to what end, I don't know. What exactly is their end game? What is their plan? Question being, you could theorize that there really is a bigger, more evil plan in place, evil system, evil doings every day by a large underground pedophile ring that involves our elected officials and law enforcement. And it's crazy to say because, again, I don't want to sound like some crazy conspiracy theorist. I don't. This isn't the Alex Jones show. And listen, I understand Alex Jones has actually come out and been proven to be correct on many things, but not all. He's still a little bit out there. And that's not what this show is. But if you're connecting the dots and you're looking at the news stories, the headlines that kind of come out, they flash in and out because they don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But they're there. And then we're talking about actual legislation that would impose harsher penalties for people selling young girls. And there's opposition to that. Like, it's too harsh. It's too broad. We can't do that. How can you not think that the conspiracy is true? How can you not think that there really is something going on? And again, I hate the word disgusted. It just, to me, it's not a strong enough word. I just don't like how it's just thrown out there. But I'm disgusted by all of this. This is ridiculous. I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of something from the documentary called "Escaping the Blade." They had a panel discussion with Shannon Grove, the sheriff, many people on this panel, and they address. I'm going to play from a certain point where they bring up why it's hard under the current law to be able to get these guys, to get these sex traffickers. Go ahead and take a listen to this.
When the law changed for minors no longer being held as prostitutes, which is the correct call there. Obviously, they're victims and they don't know what they're doing. How difficult is your job when you go and investigate these cases?
Well, when it comes to dealing with victims, let me say this, victims of sex trafficking are probably the most difficult victims that we deal with in law enforcement across the board. There's a lot of factors that, set up these roadblocks when we're trying to deal with them. Fear of their traffickers, brainwashing, manipulation by their traffickers not to cooperate with law enforcement. Also, just their general distrust with law enforcement, like if, they've been arrested for prostitution or something like that before. So it makes it very difficult. The law, as far as dealing with juveniles, yes, like they should not be criminalized at all. But at the same time, there's other tools, mechanisms in place where we can interview these young kids with like welfare and institution codes and stuff like that.
So I'm just going to throw this out. Sheriff, go ahead.
But it makes it tougher, and that's the issue. The legislature passed those laws, decriminalized child prostitution, and I argued against that on the floor. I was in the legislature at that time. Decriminalize loitering, and then you can't interview juveniles. And that's really the big issue. Everyone's after the trafficker. That's the golden goose. But how many traffickers do you really get? That's the tough part because these guys use juveniles. Number one, juveniles, hey, it's not a crime, you can't be arrested, they can't talk to you, so walk away from the cops. And they teach these young girls that. So we've got to change that narrative and really hold them accountable. And there has to be a balance. They're victims, yes, but sometimes to get to the trafficker, there's that communication between him and the victim, the girls. And there has to be a balance. Because it's interesting because some jurisdictions are hands off. They don't want to do anything with the girls. And it's a marked difference from Sacramento County, the prostitution you see. Why is that? We've got to impact it somehow. And the laws have really hampered us and hurt us in how we do that. But like I said, FBI has a task force, Homeland Security, SACPD does, we do, DA's office is trying to stand up. Everyone's chasing that trafficker. And the number of arrests just aren't there. It has exploded on the scene in Sacramento. It is a major problem with human trafficking.
So there you have it. The current laws make it to where you can't charge a minor with being a prostitute. You can't hold them. So you can't question them. So you can't get information you need to go after the actual trafficker. And there has been the frustration. And the fact that this has always been the law in place is just crazy. You hear the frustration from sheriff here. Nobody wants to see children abused. Nobody wants to see children kidnapped and forced into the sex trade. Nobody wants that for anybody, regardless of age, to be quite honest, but children are the most vulnerable. Listen, keep your head on a swivel out there, all you women. Especially in Sacramento, it sounds like, but everywhere. It's gotten out of hand. It's crazy. It's out of control, and nobody seems to be safe right now. And most of us go about our day not even realizing that this is going on in our own backyard. And it's evident that for so many years that your elected officials didn't even care enough to impose stricter, harsher punishments for these heinous crimes. Well, I know that was kind of a heavy, dark episode, but you know what? That's my job. If you have questions or comments, please email me at worldofblaze@fontsmedia. Thanks for tuning in.
Taste your content, hold your breath and feel the tension. Devils hide behind redemption, honesty